see over history how it has been prepared to become this apex of culture for our country. Hey, you guys. Welcome to the Unrefined Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Spain, accompanied by the insightful Lindsay Waters and the ever-so-brilliant BT Wallace. Join us for another dynamic episode as we unravel mysteries, share perspectives, and navigate the rich landscapes of the seen and unseen. And today we are wrapping up, and I say that in a question mark at the end, kind of like in that movie Flash Gordon. At the end, if you're old enough like me to remember Flash Gordon, it says the end, and then there's a question mark. But is this the end? We'll see. But we're going back
into... Don't be Buckaroo Banzai. They promised a sequel and never delivered.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, Flash Gordon was a lot better than Buckaroo Banzai. But Buckaroo Banzai was good, too.
Yeah.
So, but we're about to splash back into Laurel Canyon, and we're going to take up where Lindsay left off with Manson and stuff. And we're gonna kind of try to seal it up with a bow, and that gets me started with what I want to start off with. And y'all just jump in. Let's talk. I mean, this is just a free for all. What I find interesting is we're about to put the other piece of bread on this sandwich, and it's really interesting. I noticed this. Other people have noticed this too. That the one piece of bread of the sandwich, so to speak, is in 1965. That's the beginning of the countercultural movement, when all the music and all that kind of stuff. We went back to lay a foundation in an earlier episode with BT about just the, from the Native Americans on about this area, and I've got some more interesting insights dealing with that we'll get to in a little while that I've been studying and reading about. But so one slice of the bread is 1965-ish, and the other side of the bread is 1981. And we're going to talk now what the end of that sandwich is, what really caused the end of the Laurel Canyon heyday. And when I say heyday with Laurel Canyon, I mean, there's still stars now that live up there. There was still stars in the 80s later on. I mean, I heard an interesting story about Christina Applegate. She lives up there, and she has a really fascinating story. Those of you who are rock fans, she went to a party with Brad Pitt when he was younger, and she left with Sebastian Bach of Skid Row, which, if you look at those two now, I think she made the wrong choice. But Sebastian Bach is not very pretty to look at. But, I mean, we all get older. I get older. And so, but what I want to talk about right now is the Wonderland murders, or as the cops have called it, the four on the floor. So, what do you guys? Y'all have any interesting? Y'all want me to set it up, or do y'all want to let's just start talking about it?
Well, you can set it up, but I just wanted to throw in the whole four on the floor ties in with music again, because that's like the disco time signature. But it's like a play on words there, but it's also four bodies on the floor for these murders. So 81 disco was kind of fading out, or not even fading out. It just kind of morphed into other things.
I mean, Donna Summer was still around, but
it was still there. We're still kind of in the disco era there a little bit. So I just thought that was a interesting.
Well, and the four on the floor, the Wonderland murders culture was the disco culture. It was
for sure.
It wasn't the Laurel Canyon culture. It was like basically when cocaine was becoming super popular. Was introduced by I don't know, the government. Anyway, we won't go there. But
another show.
Yeah, another show. But I mean, cocaine was just coming into it, and that's what it basically the whole deal was about. But that was interesting, Lindsay. I didn't know that about the four on the floor having to do with disco. That's fascinating. I mean, that's worth the price of admission right there. That's awesome. But what it was is the police discovered, they heard, neighbors heard screaming and yelling and all this kind of stuff, but up in Laurel Canyon, particularly in this area, the Wonderland Drive, in this area of Laurel Canyon, uh, there was noise all the time. There was wild parties. So it was nothing out of the ordinary. But little did they know, just right next door, that 8763 Laurel Canyon, people were getting murdered, and it was vicious. But to kind of set up what happened to cause these murders was, it all centers around a man who is pretty famous. And if you know who he is, I'm sorry, but his name is John Holmes. And I remember back in the 80s, everybody, even kids, we all knew who John Holmes was. But he was a porn star, and I'm going to leave it at that. Was known for, his acting in adult movies. I'm going to leave it at that. And so he picked up a huge cocaine problem because he had a lot of money, and then his career started to wane, and he picked up a huge cocaine problem. So that kind of like pushed him into a life of crime. And so he decided that he was going to go, which, by the way, interestingly enough, there's been like, I think 2 movies based off this. One of them is loosely based on this, Boogie Nights.
Oh yeah.
With they don't use all the same names and stuff, but then there's another one with Val Kilmer called Wonderland, that actually Val Kilmer plays John Holmes, the star.
It was a little more accurate to
the story, yeah. Yeah, the other one was they used pseudonyms and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so he was having a cash shortage, and if you have a coke problem, and a cash shortage and a coke problem don't go very well together. And so he got his little Wonderland gang together, is what they were called, and they went to this guy named Eddie Nash, a nightclub owner, just general, organized crime kind of guy. They broke into his house and stole all kinds of stuff. He was a mark, and what they weren't prepared for was the retaliation. And what stemmed that is, and I don't know what kind of criminal takes jewelry and then wears it in public, but apparently some do. A piece of jewelry got recognized, and boom, they figured out who it was. So fast forward, Eddie Nash comes in with John Holmes and some other people, and they kill 4 people. But interestingly enough, they attack 5. One of them survives, which is really interesting because it also goes with the sandwich we talked about earlier. How many people were involved in the Sharon Tate murders?
Yeah, 5.
5. Yeah. And I don't want to make too much of that. I mean, because us as conspiracy people, we can pareidolia, we can see stuff where there's not stuff. But I mean, that is really an interesting coincidence of 5 and 5. So, but actually, one of them didn't die. She survived to live and to testify and stuff. But later on, John Holmes was arrested, and then he was acquitted. And same with Eddie Nash. I think he served a little bit of time and stuff. But that was known as one of the worst murders in LA history. Just gore. I mean, it was almost as bad as the Sharon Tate La Bianca murder. And yeah, and so just that blood was shed, and the crime scene was horrendous. And anyway, so that is the end of the Laurel Canyon heyday. It's almost like it starts with a famous murder, sort of, and ends with a famous murder, even though it had begun before Sharon Tate and all them. But it was in the mid to late '60s when they did what they did.
Mm-hmm.
So we would be remiss to do a Laurel Canyon episode and not talk about the Wonderland murders, or the 4 on the floor, as they've been named. So, any insights, guys? What do y'all think about all this? I mean, how does this relate to what we've been talking about?
I was thinking about this, how, there's this reality, this truth in Laurel Canyon, how the mysteries don't just linger, right? Things don't just hang out in the shadows of Laurel Canyon. It's like this harmonization, and they harmonize with the melody of the music scene. There's this weaving and intermix of intrigue that just like hovers right there beneath the surface of those sun-soaked streets that made up the
Mm.
whole area of Laurel Canyon. And that's my big takeaway from this whole series, is these amazing effects that we kind of get this idea that this place exists only after
Mhm.
like the Tate murders, and then it's there and it kind of in the back of people's minds, and it's like, hey, let me remind you this place exists with the four on the floor.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also, this isn't like inner city LA we're talking about here. This
No,
is
not at
like
all.
kind of
Yeah.
the out really beautiful canyons and nice homes, and not place this isn't like some crime ridden, well, it is crime ridden, but you wouldn't think would be a crime ridden part of LA. It just changes your whole perspective on what parts of cities are the worst, and especially when you can just consider this very nice residential area.
But it's not straight out of Compton.
Yeah,
You know what
yeah.
I'm saying? I mean, to use an LA reference. I mean, actually, Compton's probably safer than Laurel Canyon if you
Mhm.
look at the statistics involved there. Yeah, I don't want to get them all wrong, but the statistics just show that more people die per capita in Laurel Canyon than anywhere else in Los Angeles. That's amazing, y'all. I
Mm.
mean, imagine if you lived in a little neighborhood. And I mean, this is a little neighborhood, you guys. It probably has a few hundred houses in it. It's not like it's 1,000 houses or like one of these big suburban kind of things or whatever. It was intimate even back in the 60s. It was a community, and to see and there, like here's an example. Here recently, I pulled up an article in the L.A. Times of a body being dumped there. So it's not only that all the things that we're talking about happen there, but it's like a body dumping ground. It's almost like it's a cemetery,
Mm.
for and blood is a heavy motif there. It's really interesting. And then I wanted to bring this up too because I thought this was fascinating. Um, the most sung about city in the world is New York City, but the second most sung about um like area, if you add all the different names for it up, is this whole Hollywood, LA, Laurel Canyon area. Now the second largest city that's sung about is London,
Right.
but but
Fair.
if you take California, you take Los Angeles, you take Beverly Hills, you take Hollywood, and you add all those up, they surpass all of it, and they're all basically the same area, the same place.
Yeah.
And it just shows to me, and we're talking about these sinister forces, because I mean, obviously, this is all backed up by sinister forces. There's a plan going on here. And if anybody ever wants to question whether land can be cursed or defiled or whatever, I mean, just look no further than Laurel Canyon.
Right.
But what's interesting about all this to me, and BT brought this up in his first episode, is that it you can see over history how it has been prepared to become this
Yeah.
apex of culture for our country. And BT, I want you to tell our audience like what you were telling me about. I think it was yesterday about there's a move or an influence in Hollywood to try to get out of not get out of Hollywood, but to alter or change Hollywood. Will
Yeah.
you tell us about that?
The brief amount of information that I've read,
Yeah. Right, right.
mainly because we're all busy trying to study and research everything else. I had
Yeah.
simply saw a banner, a note come across my news media that people like Mel Gibson and Mark Wahlberg and a handful of others, Angelina Jolie was listed. We're trying to create a new kind of production team, a new kind of studio setup that was designed to be clean and apart from those, the child chaff, any of those rumors or situations that are definitely going on in Hollywood. I mean, it was all exposed in the Me Too movement. So we understand that
Yeah.
there's some pretty dark and nasty things and behaviors going on in Hollywood. So these pretty big names are wanting to develop a production or a studio set that's Hollywood, but the way that it should have been.
Yes. A safer Hollywood. You know what breaks my heart particularly, and we can go into this discussion, is all these child actors. I mean, if you ever do a deep
Oh
dive
yeah,
into child actors and all the problems and all the stuff that they've been through, and it's just like it's just awful. And then I think about and this is something that, down the road we might could cover, or the John Benet Ramsey
Mm.
thing, and which was in Colorado, but it's still it's that whole culture of we seem to elevate children to this pinnacle, and discard older people. Youth is
Hmm.
so worshipped in our culture, but that's not new, is it, BT? I mean,
no,
or Lindsay, that's not new. It's been worshipped throughout history, hasn't it?
Oh yeah.
the ancient Greek culture celebrated youth.
Yeah. Well, and it's celebrated in what I'd consider the sinful way that it's starting to be celebrated in the United States now. It was a man on boy youth,
Yep.
Right.
and we've done ministry with people trying to get out of the lifestyle, and I'll just leave it there of that. And they said that when you get older, like past 40, you
Yeah,
either
you're
have that
discarded. Yeah.
or you have a lot of money. That's the only two options you have. Either you have a lot of money and you can be somebody's sugar daddy, or you're
Yeah.
discarded. And see, I see that relating to ancient history, and we also know the Greek culture was really pretty big on a lot of that type of debauchery as well,
Hmm.
Greeks and
Right.
Romans. And so as we watch our country slowly, not saying it's the end times. I mean, so goes America, doesn't so go the end times.
We've been saying that.
I'm going to offend somebody out there, but it's just true. It's
Yeah.
true anyway. But irregardless of that, as America slides into the ends of what it took the Roman Empire thousands of years to get to, I want to add, uh, as we slide into it, you see the same type things. And in the United States, this is where it comes from. It comes from Laurel Canyon. It comes from Hollywood. It comes from this strip of land, because Hollywood and Laurel Canyon are they're interconnected. If you understand the geography of, I mean, Studio City is right up on the top of Laurel Canyon up there, uh, where they make the movies and a lot of that kind of stuff. And the Santa Monica Mountains are between them and the ocean, and you have to go further down California to get to the beach. But yeah, I mean, it's that whole area, and I can't remember. Y'all refresh my memory. Whoever remembers the Indian tribe that was part of like Laurel Canyon and Topanga Canyon and these different canyons in the
I
Santa
think they're
Monica
the.
Mountains.
I don't know if I'm saying it right, but the Tongva.
Yeah.
Tongva,
Tongva. Yeah.
Tongva.
Is that BT? Is that you mentioned them
Yeah.
too? Is it?
Yeah. I had a hard time remembering them when I was talking with the guys out of Cult Rejects, but we brought that up on their episode how the Native Americans, the indigenous peoples in the area, considered this whole area a sacred space to the point where they
Mm.
Yep.
really didn't go into it. And I think that it was kind of a sign that it gave the people that moved into there to move into that area, because it's like, well, you guys don't use it, so we will.
Yeah, that fascinates me because I'm doing some research for another podcast that's going to come out about spoiler, Amish and the occult in the Amish. And something interesting about that was this guy had a house on land that was cursed by Indians when they were made to move, and so you just wonder sometimes if, okay, this tribe was in Laurel Canyon, they were apparently probably pushed out. What kind of curses, what kind of defilement did they leave on the land? And then, even living there, I mean, like near where we are in Mississippi, there's a tribe called the Natchez, which was down south, and they were bloodthirsty. Didn't they do a human sacrifice, Lindsay?
Well, yeah. I mean, when the Great Sun, um, their king, chief, ruler, the head one anyway, would die. I mean, that people would be voluntarily strangled to be put into his tomb with him. It's still going on when the French were recording their culture in the early 1700s. So yeah,
like LaSalle. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What you were saying something, BT? What were you saying?
No, I was saying that I can't speak on
the
behaviors of that tribe.
Yeah, it's one of our local tribes. It's widely heard of though, because it was one of there's a short list of cannibalistic / human sacrificing tribes in the United States. Believe it or not, those mostly were in South America. And
the Natchez were kind of the last sort of remains in a lot of ways of that sort of Mississippian mound builder culture. And
yes,
when DeSoto came through, they were still thriving. There were lots of them. When LaSalle came back through, there were just a few scattered cultures left there. So neither here nor there. But
all right, well, let's talk about something. You just open up the hole for the wide receiver to run through here, buddy. All right, let's talk about mounds and this stuff. I wonder. I speculate if there are any mounds in the area of Laurel Canyon. Because who was it that we interviewed? We don't have to name a name, but we interviewed somebody, Lindsay, and they were talking about I remember who it was. Yeah.
Was it MK?
Yeah, it was MK. He was talking about the juju, so to speak, coming off these mounds. And he was talking about in Mississippi how, and I didn't even tell you about this, BT, how in Mississippi, we had a tornadic experience a few years ago where I know you. It was when Rolling Fork got destroyed, and everybody made fun of it because Biden came down here, which is really interesting because Biden doesn't go to many tornadoes, but he came to this one, which was interesting. And but this tornadic experience, BT, jumped from mound to mound. I mean, it's straight out of MK's mouth. It followed mounds. That's bizarre for a weather thing to follow. So I've been thinking about that a whole lot since we've interviewed him, and I was just thinking about the power that is emitted. I wonder if anybody's ever ran an electromagnetic, an EMP. Is it an EMP, an EMT? Is it EM? What is the device called, guys?
EVP,
I'm not sure.
Electronic voice phenomenon. Recording?
Well, but there's some. Yeah, it's a device. Yeah, that picks up electromagnetic energy. Okay. I forget the name of the device. One of my ghost hunter friend can probably tell me, but I've wondered if anybody has run that around mounds. I'm sure somebody probably has. Yeah, but and then that's not just a empirical case that either you have it and it means it's like that, or you don't have it means it's not. But I wonder, because we know about the pyramids in Egypt, and we've heard stuff about those being energy sources and stuff through electromagnetic type energy and stuff. I wonder if there's something more to these mounds, and how many of these little clusters of cryptid / paranormal stuff we see that are near mounds. That would be a fascinating thing. Anyway, but back to Laurel Canyon. I wonder if there's some kind of a Native American type presence there that could cause this energy to have. We looked online. Sandy and I got online and we looked at the ley lines, and there's not a hub of ley lines in Laurel Canyon. There, the hub is more to the east, which is where a lot of these stars, like Jim Morrison and all these guys, Santiana or whatever his name was, and they go out there to have like vision quests and peyote and get connected with their, which is interesting that they go to the desert, which there's even a biblical precedent for that. But what we did notice though is one of the ley lines that comes out of this hub runs exactly through across the Santa Monica Mountains, across through Laurel Canyon.
Yeah.
So there is a form of a ley line that runs right through there. And and that just makes you wonder. And I don't even know a lot about ley lines. I mean, I'm not by any means an expert, but I do know that in the occult world that they have significance, right, BT?
Ley lines and the occult significance?
Yeah.
Absolutely. The idea is, I think it's ancient. I think it's old. It's probably druidic or something. But that certain, if you were to investigate sites, etc., around the world, somebody would argue that ley lines are pretty much the invisible or unseen connections between one geographical site to another geographical site, such as, say, the connection from the Great Pyramid at Giza to Stonehenge, or Stonehenge to Mayan temple complexes, etc., would be these ley lines and courses of power maybe that connect one site to another site. There seems to be ritual significance in facing a direction of a sacred site, and this is found throughout many different religions. Judaism facing the Holy of Holies, Islam facing Kaaba, Mecca, and then in Christian circles, the idea of one's body being laid where they would sit up facing the east, as the returning of the Son of Man will be, like the rising of the sun.
Yeah. We just watched a movie. Yeah, Lindsay watched this Midnight.
In the Garden of Good and Evil.
Didn't they bury a guy facing? I'm thinking about a different show. Okay. No, it was a different show that Sandy and I were watching, and actually buried this guy in a coffin where he could look up and look over his estate, and that reminds me of that. What you're talking about, how we don't realize how there's all these burial customs of all these different things, and even some of the Christian ones are weird.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, or the use in ritual. I mean, the idea of facing liturgical east, which was very common.
Yes. Yeah. Particularly with churches. But yeah, some people are sticklers about that. So that's all part of that whole liturgical being buried, gravestones towards the east and all that kind of stuff.
But as we're talking about the Laurel Canyon area and
right.
The 60s to the early 80s, there's a zeitgeist. It was a spirit of the times, and that spirit seemed to be pretty sinister and malicious in its intent. And it brought me to this idea, and if we tie it into something a little close to home, how God desires that all men come to a knowledge of the truth, right? He wants us all to turn to the Lord Jesus Christ. And this is what's interesting is, for man throughout history, before now, this, we're talking about the 60s and 80s. This is a fourth wave, the New Age, right?
Yes.
We can go back to the dawn of time, and even then, man had a keen understanding and enough foresight to understand there was something unseen. Man was aware that things worked for good and things worked for evil. And since that time, man has sought to combat them in spiritual warfare, and others have sought to ingratiate themselves to those dark forces, to join hands in shaping the dark destiny with those malicious entities. And it's here, in places like Laurel Canyon, that there has been a strengthening of the sinister forces.
Yes. And we see, and I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm embellishing. I don't know, guys. But we see this in the whole Hollywood, LA, California scene more than anywhere, in my opinion, in the United States. It is the center hub for culture for our country.
Well, it is also an interesting aspect, as I've been researching the idea that there are what appears to be at least three, there's probably more, occult-based groups that are kind of at war with each other. That would be the Dionysian, the Typhonian, and the Osirian groups. And it's like, when we look at where Laurel Canyon came from, is its establishment as what it is, really seems to be chaotic. These tape murders, these 4 on the floor murders, these are actions of chaos. These are not actions of order or debauchery.
Which would be Dionysian.
Well, yeah, the process cult had 3 factions that almost break down like what you just said. They had an orderly, good faction, and then they had a more chaotic, do what you will, do what thou wilt sort of faction, and then there was one that was orderly but more in an earth worshipping kind of way. But yeah, it kind of break down that exact same way.
Yeah, and
this is. Are you done, BT? I don't want to interrupt you.
No, that's good. I was going to say that one of the fathers of this Typhonian order is a guy named Kenneth Grant. He was basically Aleister Crowley's secretary for a number of years. And we've got the ideas of places like the Church of Satan right there, Los Angeles. Anton LaVey was a renowned person for going to Laurel Canyon in the 60s.
I mean, he's a poser, but still, I mean, he still is in that same vein and spirit, though. I mean, I consider him a poser. I don't
either
think
you're a poser or you're playing into the hands, and if you're playing into the hands, you're doing it for a reason.
Yes. Well, this kind of you just open another door right to what we need to talk about too, is continuing along modern day Laurel Canyon, Hollywood, that whole area, the Strip, just different associated cults that were there. Lindsay alluded to the Process Church, but there was a film out called Holy Hell Film, which I caught some snippets of. It was it's crazy. Anyway, and it was like the Buddha Field cult. Is that how you pronounce that? The Buddha Field cult? Are you?
I don't know much about it. It was an Indian guy, and he kind of walked around in a Speedo all the time, and had this like cult around him.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah,
I don't think I could do that.
The 1980s in Hollywood, it was kind of Rajneesh or something.
Yeah, I don't know. But there's a documentary out there, you guys, our audience, if you want to check it out. It's a cult. But this is the big one that I really wanted to hone into, and I think we could spend some substantial time talking to it, because it's a cult too. And I'm not going to sing it because I don't want to get a copyright violation. But there is a pretty popular song out there. A lot of songs allude to it, but there's a pretty popular song out there by Tom Petty about the vampires walking through the valley, move west down
Ventura Boulevard. Edit that out, Sandy.
No, I mean, we didn't sing it. It's good, but where's Ventura Boulevard, you guys? It's in the Santa Monica Mountains. I mean, it's like so we have this whole new and old thing coming on. I mean, you go back to what we talked about in the first episode about Bela Lugosi and the vampires, but now I found doing research, I found this like fascinating stuff. Los Angeles has, including the canyon and the Strip, has this huge vampire culture.
Oh yeah,
and I'm not just talking about goth with fake teeth or filed teeth. I mean, what really shocked me is there's actually an online website called Father Sebastian's Vampire Guide, Los Angeles, and he just goes into all these different. He talks about they have a Los Angeles vampire ball. There's a ghost tour. It's called the City of Dark Angels, which is really interesting. But what really jumped out at me, you guys, was this place called the Magic Castle. Have y'all heard of that? The
I
Magic
haven't
Castle?
actually. What's
No.
that?
Mm-mm.
It is a secret society for vampires. And you have to get an invite. It's a private club. It's in an old house. It opened in the 1960s, interestingly enough. And it's also a clubhouse. They have an academy for magical arts, kind of like a Harry Potter school. I'm sorry, I'm not making fun of it, but because I mean, this is serious. This is serious stuff. These people are not dabblers. These are not, a golf teenager listening to Misfits with a Misfit shirt
Right.
on, FTW.
No, they're real
the old
people,
version of
Brandon.
that.
There's
Yes.
Marcus
Yes.
Wesson. Did you guys hear about Marcus Wesson? In the 80s, he
No,
had a bunch of kids, and well, I'm not going to bash homeschool, but he homeschooled them, and he taught them from a Bible that he hand wrote, where he describes Jesus Christ as a vampire. I mean, you just let that sink in, and then he basically kills the kids, and then so this is I think this is Washington State. So I mean, it's kind of a really interesting story about people who honestly put some faith into the vampire practice.
Mm.
Well, I mean, they just take the scripture that John 6, they just take it too serious. They take it too literally,
Yeah, they can take
that,
it where they
that Jesus
turn that into vampirism. Absolutely.
vampirism. Yeah. Which is ironic because that's where occultic type, particularly more the satanic vein of occultic, which people need to realize all the occult is satanic, but not all satanic is cult. There's a differentiation between, not every occultist would call themselves satanic. As a matter of fact, Wiccans just like flee from that, even though Wiccans, as I've learned from a real good buddy of mine, is kind of a poser group as well.
Well, there's
as far as a cult, right?
Yeah.
I mean, is it? I mean,
well, here's this is truth. If we were alive in the 1600s and we practiced something like pseudoscience, we would be considered occultists, right? Or
Right.
alchemists, or some other whatever word was invented.
Well, Newton was one.
Newton was
a
a
lot of
known
them
alchemist.
were.
And
Yeah.
that's all parlance, right? That's all words that we would use. And today we say things like alternative archaeology. That's occultism if it's not being published for the mainstream. But there's a difference between satanic occultism, which is designed to ingratiate people to the powers of darkness, and there's people like us who are trying to uncover the truth, but are set in the tinfoil hat club when we're talking about these kinds of things. But it's truth, it's reality, and it's like people are just complacent in their own little lives to just not step forward and take the adventure on the other side of the horizon and see what's out there.
Well, here it is. I mean, it's cliche, but it's true nonetheless. The truth is stranger than fiction. I mean, some of the stuff that I've learned researching Laurel Canyon, or just some of the stuff that I've since this podcast, I couldn't write a book that would be more fantastical than some of the stuff I'm learning. We live in an enchanted world, whether for good or for evil, and I think that goes back to the whole DCW and where we come from and how we approach our faith now is we need to live in this enchanted world, and we need to know the difference between the good part of it and the bad part of it. And it's not always quite so
black and white
obvious. Yes, definitely. But yeah, I really thought that Magic Castle, I thought that was fascinating that they have, boom, a secret society based on vampirism and stuff. So,
well, we already knew that there are several different kinds of secret societies in California in the area that we're specifically talking about.
All right, well, let's talk about those.
Let's talk about we'll bring up Freemason. I want to do Freemasonry real quick because we've got a place. It was called the Laurel Tavern for a long time. I think it's the Log House or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And people are familiar. What was that? Frank Zappa was there for a while.
Yep.
Well,
the log cabin.
Log cabin.
Yeah.
Well, it belonged to a guy named Thomas Nix, who anybody who's like a film buff would know. He's one of the guys that did like 128 Western films.
Like spaghetti westerns.
Oh,
Those
I
good-
think they were
those-
silent spaghetti westerns.
Yeah.
Silent films were
Yeah, I
usually
love
30-minute
those.
long
Yeah,
videos
yeah.
anyways. They weren't very long. And, we
Yeah.
talked about in the first episode that movies were designed for kind of the poorer class anyways. But you
Yep.
got this guy, and he's a Freemason, but he's not just a Freemason. He's part of what's known as the Order of the Arch. And this is a group of individuals within Masonry who followed Zerubbabel. And if you remember Zerubbabel, he was the one that wanted to
Yes.
basically rebuild a temple. And I think it talks about
Right.
it being finished in the book of Ezra.
He's the one that is not by my might, not by the Spirit, but wait, I'm getting that verse. I'm totally butchering that verse. Yeah, I need to get
that's
better.
the thing. But the thing is Zerubbabel and this Order of the Arch in Freemasonry, they basically trace their lineage back to a temple that was built by Enoch.
Which one?
Not the son of Cain. Oddly enough, you would think that
Okay.
it was the son of Cain, but this was
Yeah.
Enoch, the one
Yeah.
who was with God
Was
because
not.
God took him, right?
Yeah.
And the idea that Enoch basically built this temple made of archways, and this is their legend. This is not something I ascribe to, which means talking about it isn't something I agree with. But
Right.
Solomon, when he builds his temple, he builds it in a location that underneath where he built his temple was the arches of Enoch, which took him into the 7 different levels of heaven, which is kind of that's portal language, and all part of the ideas that the Freemasons wanted to build a new temple to Enoch, or the Zerubbabel temple in Hollywood. So if you run with that,
Wow.
you really think and process that we've got a group of people who are already working with some kind of occult, esoteric, dark force idea of what a temple is and what it's designed for.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this isn't, it's not just the OTO, the Order Temple Orientis in California.
Right.
Freemasons are seeking some kind of dark power too in this time period.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we talked about the process church, but let's just go further back. I mean, Jack Parsons and
The parsonage.
and L. Ron Hubbard. I mean,
Yeah.
they were
Yeah.
out. They were out there. I mean, this is something interesting that I found out in my research, and this is just a side note. But I mean, what's so fun about doing this is at least to me, doing this research and diving into this stuff, is being able to discern between when a coincidence is strictly a coincidence and when a coincidence has more threads to it, and and you have several of these coincidences pile up, and then you begin just like if you're an investigator and a
Yeah.
detective. But I found this really fascinating, you guys. Bela Lugosi,
Yes.
the premier vampire.
Mm.
Everybody knows who Bela Lugosi is. If you don't know the name, you know his face. And what's interesting about Bela is his star is right across from L. Ron Hubbard's
Oh wow.
headquarters.
The headquarters of Scientology.
Well, no, it's not headquarters of Scientology. It's like a museum for L. Ron Hubbard.
Gotcha.
And yeah, I mean, yeah, so it's probably run by Scientology. But yeah, I mean, coincidence? Maybe so. I don't know. And that's something I want to caveat right here for everybody out there in our audience. We're not coming down saying this is empirical fact. This is all true. All we're doing is putting stuff out there for you just to kind of run the threads and to
Mhm.
see, because, like I said earlier, sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. And I found out in my 50 years that there's a lot out there that I don't know about.
Mhm.
And I'm a pretty well traveled and well read person, but there is so much out there, and the more I learn, the less I realize I know. And and people say, well, is there an overwide conspiracy that someone's running in the world?
Yeah.
Well, yes. If you believe the biblical narrative, yes, absolutely. It's Hasatan and his minions. Is it a person? Is it a person? Maybe not. It might be several persons that are being operated through this, but there is an overarching conspiracy, and to know that is to do warfare, because we live in, like our friend Doug Van Dorn likes to say, it's fifth generational warfare. It's we now live in an area where you can have a coup without ever pulling out a gun. So that also is the case with spiritual warfare. It's a warfare of word. I mean, Jesus is the Logos, is the word. And so how does Satan combat him? With lies about that are words. And we need to realize that. And that's why I think, people ask me, why do you study all this stuff? I mean, doesn't it depress you? Doesn't it? But, well, number one, I don't just study it all the time. I like to watch stupid movies too, to kind of take my mind off it, read literature and fiction books. But I don't approach it like in a fascinating sense. Like I want, I see it as, like Lewis always said, I'm dropped over enemy lines and I've got to do some recon to see what the enemy is doing, to know how to properly fight the enemy, because there's people's, like you said earlier, BT, and I think Lindsay alluded to it as well.
Yeah.
There's people, souls are in jeopardy out there. And that's what it comes back to, you guys. It comes back to souls. I study this because I want, like Paul said, perhaps win some. I want to win souls. And he who wins souls is wise, it says in the Proverbs. And I think that's the key. And the only way to do that is to be able to relate to these people. I mean, going in as a Bible thumper into a vampire club is going to get you like absolutely nowhere. So, anyway, that's my commercial, you guys, for evangelism. Sorry. But this whole vampire cult in this area was just, when I did some more research, there's just, I just dare you to Google Father Sebastian's vampire and do the Los Angeles one. He has it for different areas. I haven't checked out New Orleans yet. I need to, but anyway, and there's also a secret society type group in. It's kind of touted as a what do you call them? When you live in a neighborhood and you have to sign a covenant.
A homeowners association.
Homeowners association.
Yeah. There is a homeowners kind of a. So I know, y'all. My brain's fried. Anyway, no, of Laurel Canyon and Lookout Mountain.
Sure.
And there's a group there, and it's super sort of secretive. So,
well, if we call it all secretive, and it's kind of a weird community going on, who owns Lookout Mountain's Air Force Base?
Oh, yeah, we hadn't even got to that yet. Yep. Well, I was going to get there, but let's get there now. Jared, how do you say his name?
Jared Leto.
Leto?
Yeah.
Yeah,
we had a big argument between how to pronounce his name, because, I mean, is it Leto or is it Leto? What's going on? And then you look up different people who introduce him, and then nobody seems to say it the same way.
So Jared Leto owns that Air Force. Actually, it wasn't Air Force. It was it Navy? I can't remember.
I want to say it was Air Force, but hold on. Look.
Okay. Well, Air Force makes sense because Air Force is the intelligence agency for the military. So, I mean, people think that they're all about planes. You're wrong. I mean, that's just reality.
It was an Air Force base. It was an Army base first, because there was no Air Force until 1947.
So, well, I mean, it started in the 40s, so that would have been before the
Air Force.
Late 40s, that would have been before it was officially
Air Force.
And General Curtis LeMay
Army intelligence
was involved in it.
Interesting.
He's an interesting character.
So it's Army.
He came up in that Chaos Manson book by O'Neill that I read.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure I remember reading about him in it. But yeah, it was military. We know that.
It was designed to make propaganda.
Yeah. Yeah, in military, and then I think during that time period, the CIA didn't exist; it was the OSS. And don't ask me to tell you what the OSS stands for. I've looked it up like 6 times. I can't ever remember. Operating Strategic Services or something. I don't know. But it was OSS before it was the CIA. But it was taken over later, and we've had some connections with people who were actually MK Ultra and were actually experimented on in that particular facility. So we know firsthand it's a real deal. And now Jared Leto owns it, buys it, makes it a house. It'd be like, if you haven't watched Stranger Things, spoiler alert, but it'd be like going to the laboratory at Stranger Things and they say, okay, well, yeah, I know everything that's happened here, but I think I'm gonna make it into a mansion.
Yeah. Could you say it would be Jared Leto could call it My So-Called House? I don't know if anybody will pick up on that reference.
Yeah,
My
exactly.
So-Called
No, yeah, My So-Called Life. Yeah, yeah, and it's really interesting. I haven't seen any pictures of how he's redone it. I mean, there's a lot of pictures out there of it back in the like 60s and 70s. But supposedly, that, and I think we talked about it a little bit in the first episode, but just to rehash it a little bit, it was set up to be a movie studio for propaganda, which that would be the word they would use because, Americans, we don't do propaganda. Only those bad Russians and Chinese people do propaganda. Anyway, that was sarcasm.
Well, also, Jolly West I don't think he was able to, wanted to use it for kind of MK Ultra type stuff later and wasn't able to.
Yes. So, yeah, that was just a spot. And, I think I read somewhere in my research that before it was bought by Leto, it's been through several different things, but it was abandoned for a while. And people would sneak back. It's really funny. You're in this beautiful, Laurel Canyon neighborhood, which is it's a really pretty neighborhood, you guys. I mean, it's really the view to overlook Los Angeles is incredible. And but you sneak back up in the woods a little ways and you find this military base that was abandoned. And the other thing a lot of people don't realize is there was a lot of Nazis there during the war. Part of the whole Operation Paperclip. See, a lot of people think that started, and I think it did start full force after World War II, but it was going on before World War II. And that's just, just not publicized highly out there. I want to go back to the music scene for a second in Laurel Canyon and just talk about how even though we were sandwiched between the beginning 1965, which I'd say the Mamas and the Papas, I mean, and Frank Zappa and those guys. And then the end in the Wonderland murders, the Four on the Floor. But Laurel Canyon didn't die out, and it's still in popular songs. We talked about that. There was a song, it's about counting crows, Lindsay, that I think that's who it is.
Long December.
And people, they sing it and you don't realize how's the words.
There's one more day up in the canyon.
Yeah.
And something about a hillside. I know there was another serial killer, the Hillside Strangler. I mean, just a lot of weird references in there.
Yeah, what is it? And it's one more day up in the canyon, one more night.
One more night in Hollywood. Yeah,
one more night in Hollywood. Yeah.
If you think that I could be forgiven, I wish you would.
Yeah, I mean, it's just all kinds of cryptic stuff dealing with that in the music scene. But so its legend still lives on. And what I wanted to bring out, which I thought was really interesting, and I owe a lot of this to that McGowan book, which I know I want to caveat here. If you've listened to the rest of our podcast on that, we've used that as a source, but we didn't use that as our only source because we don't want to we're not a one book wonder. We dive into it. We look up other sources as well.
Yeah, we can't even count the number of rabbit trails we followed down to
exactly. But you guys know, I mean, that's how you do research. If you just regurgitate one book or one blog, that's not really research. Somebody can go and read that. So it's our synthesis that we've made here. But what I wanted to talk about is the Copelands. It's an intelligence family,
Mhm. Yep.
and this is in the whole '80s era. The father, the patriarch, was a guy named Miles Copeland. They were British. He was a legendary Western intelligence officer, and that whole family, the Copeland family, the whole family. Now, don't get him confused with Kenneth and all that stuff. So that we're not talking about the preacher, but this is just a different family. His son Ian, and they traveled the world. They were in the Middle East. He was what they call the station command.
Yeah, he was a
Station,
station commander of CIA in Damascus at one point,
yeah, all over
around
the
the time of
place.
a coup.
Yeah, and so interesting enough, though, Ian decided to have his hand in the music world, which even still back then was still based the area of Laurel Canyon going down to the Sunset Strip, where like the whiskey was and the Troubadour and all these some of these other bars is where all these guys got their start. Like the whole hair glam, metal, Motley Crue, Poison, all these guys, Metallica. I mean, that's where they all got their start, was down the Sunset Strip and in that whole area.
Yeah.
But what I want to talk about with the Copelands, and it relates to Laurel Canyon, is there is and I'm gonna read this, and I'm gonna try not to sound like it's read, but there's a lot more that I'm gonna read. There's a series of bands that this one family. This amazes me, guys, because I know at least 80% of these bands, and they had their hand in involvement in them in these bands, and this is an intelligence family. Okay, like I said, coincidence? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I'm not going to come down and say it's empirical truth, but these coincidences start adding up, and you start to wonder. So maybe the three letters agencies were still involved in the whole cultural movement that they started back in the '60s in Laurel Canyon. And so anyway, let me go through some of these bands. You guys, some of you guys are going to know them. If you don't, that's okay. But they're really, a lot of them are bands that are very well known. The first one is the Sex Pistols, the Clash, General Public Image Limited, which Johnny Rotten from Sex
Yeah.
Pistols actually started. The B-52s, everybody knows what the Love Shack is.
Right.
The Cure, the Police. I mean, the Police was the premier band of the '80s.
Yeah.
I think they were one of the best bands of the '80s.
Well, and Andy Summers, real quick, lived in Laurel Canyon in the '60s.
Yep, exactly.
Part of that. Yeah, so there's their connection there.
Their connection there. Yep. Blondie, Miss Rapture, who with Men from Mars Who Eat Guitars, REM, Lou Reed, Simple Minds, the Go-Go's, the Bangles, Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, Echo and the Bunnymen, Psychedelic Furs, Joy Division, Gang of Four, Susie and the Banshees, Oingo Boingo, Adam Ant, the Smiths, which would be Morrissey as well, the Flock of Seagulls, Bananarama, Sting, Thompson Twins, Katrina and the Waves. They had that one hit, Walking on Sunshine, if y'all remember it. Midnight Oil, Human League, Soft Cell, the Circle Jerks, Jesus and the Mary Chain, the Ramones, they're a pretty hardcore a skate band, UB40, Red Wine, Fine Young Cannibals, and I mean, and there's more too that I didn't get into that a lot of people probably wouldn't recognize. But just look at the sheer nature of all those bands, and this one guy had influence, and it all connects back to Laurel Canyon, and a lot of these bands were in Laurel Canyon, like what Lindsay said, Andy Summers of the Police, before they made their debut. And I just want to say this, you guys, and y'all feel free to argue with me about this, but it is not a coincidence that there has been so many musicians that come through Laurel Canyon that just all of a sudden just succeed. That all of a sudden just are nominal musicians and then become almost as big as the Beatles. I'm thinking about the Birds, like we talked about in our second episode.
Or
You
what about
know,
James Marshall,
all right, yeah. I mean,
Jimi Hendrix?
Jimi Hendrix. I mean, what and Jimi Hendrix fascinating. I mean, he was an airborne ranger. I mean,
Yeah.
that's special forces in the military, and he becomes one of the I think a little overrated, but one of the greatest guitar players in American history. That reminds me of another guy that we talked about in another podcast who went up to a crossroads right near here and sucked at guitar and then came back playing it brilliantly. That would be Robert Johnson. So you just wonder, okay, on a natural viewpoint, you just look at it and say, well, the CIA was involved in this, and they fudged the numbers, and they were able to start this countercultural movement with natural psychological means. They know how movements work, and if you ever want to see anything really funny, audience out there, get on YouTube and look up on how a movement starts, and it's
Yeah.
this really interesting video with this guy dancing, and it shows just the psychological dynamic of how a movement starts. And you have early adopters and then late adopters, and that is what the CIA did. But you can't tell me, judging from what we've studied and what we've learned about these sinister forces, that there was not something behind this. So we take it back. Some people, like the book we read with McGowan, takes it back to intelligence communities and the government. I think we would be remiss if we didn't take it back to the true source. These sinister forces that have inhabited this Laurel Canyon area for no telling how long.
Yeah.
What say you guys?
I mean, yeah, we can argue all day about the human factor in it, but some of these coincidences can't be explained by the human factor, so that they just kind of point to something bigger.
Yeah.
When they add up.
Anybody
could have brought something. It doesn't take a whole lot of thought process to research what's called an egregore. I think I've talked about that before.
We'll talk about it again. Define it for us.
Yeah, so the egregore is a principle within occult philosophy. It goes way back to the medieval era, and it's the process of taking an idea, a thought form is another word for it. Thought form is another word. And it's taking this idea and putting intentionality behind it by reinforcing it. There's a rudimentary example of this with ice crystals. When you take water and you freeze it under certain words, it shows a developmental difference. If you do happy, light, love, you get these really vibrant, beautiful ice crystals. And then if you do evil, darkness, Satan, you get these really gross, decrepit, nasty looking ice crystals. Well, these are thought
Japanese guy. Some Japanese guy did that.
Exactly.
He did experiments. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
And so that's kind of a rudimentary idea to help people understand the concept of a thought form. Well, you get a group of individuals together, say, I don't know, an order of the Lamites, and you introduce them to Babylon, Babalon, not Babylon, Babylon, or Nuit, Nuit, and you just get them to say rituals over and over and over to these words, these thought forms. They eventually form power. There is psychic power that has been shown to form around a thought form. And this can become a spirit. This can become a geist. And this becomes an egregore. And it can become something that's inhabited. And honestly, I believe it's inhabited by a fallen angel or one of the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim.
Yeah.
Takes form.
It's sentient, right? It becomes sentient, correct?
Well, yes, because it's becoming inhabited by something that's far more intelligent than we will ever be.
Almost. Well, except these aren't intelligent. They're like big oafs, kind of. But it makes me think of the Jewish notion of the golem.
Right. The golem is a form of this idea, but it's it's a program. That's a machine.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's only able to do what its creator does, whereas an egregore becomes self-aware, becomes a
Mm.
god.
Wow.
Well, this is perfect too, man. It's amazing how the Holy Spirit just how he steers our discussions we have here. This is perfect to bring up the one last thing I wanted to do, and then I'm gonna land this UFO. Uh, and it deals with UFOs. There's
Yeah.
been tons of UFO sightings in the canyon, particularly Topanga, but Topanga's so close to Laurel, it's all the same. I mean, it's you live in the canyons. That's what they say out in LA. You live up in the canyon. And Laurel Canyon is just a specific little part of the whole canyon system. But there's been paranormal type things near the old Houdini house. It's at the intersection of Laurel Canyon Boulevard and Lookout Mountain,
Mm-hmm.
and which is like the junction, the crossroads. Interestingly enough, and yeah, there's been UFO sightings, and this all goes back to. And if anybody out there in the audience can help me with this, I would appreciate it. Heard a interview on Coast to Coast with George Norrie years ago about this guy wrote this book basically where he noticed that, and this is kind of old news, but I really would like to read this book where he noticed that all these phenomena appeared in clusters. You could take a map where you have Bigfoot sightings, UFOs, cryptids, paranormal, ghosts, all this kind of stuff, and you could overlay, not exactly, but you could overlay, and they happened in clusters, like there was hot pockets,
All right.
hot,
Hot pocket.
yeah, exactly. It shows my age.
Jim
The
Gaffigan.
hot areas, and that goes back to what I was talking about earlier. I wonder how near mounds were when in these areas, which that's another whole podcast. But there's been a lot of unidentified flying objects, which I prefer that over UAP, that have been seen in this area, which just adds to the nuance of this place being a hub of supernatural power that I think emanates across the entire country. It's just amazing to me that one town can have so much power. And that really hit me when I looked up how many songs were written about Los Angeles, Hollywood, and Laurel Canyon and Beverly Hills, all that we sing so much more about that area than any other area in the United States. And that's just, and it's not even our nation's capital. Um, but it's definitely, I would say, a capital of some sort of power. What do you guys think?
I mean, yeah, it's the entertainment capital for sure.
Definitely.
It's synonymous with the word entertainment for not just Americans, probably British English speakers as well. I mean,
Yeah.
so yeah, no doubt about that.
Well, I mean, you think about it. People come to America. That's one of the places they want. I mean, even if they want to go to Disney, they want to go to Disneyland, which is out in California, which that's another whole.
Yeah, Anaheim ain't that far away from Los
Oh
Angeles.
yeah,
Yeah.
not at all. I mean, yeah, it's a hop, skip, and a jump. I mean that whole SoCal area. But yeah, so I just wanted to just bring that up, that just to land this journey that we've been doing with UFOs. But I just want to say this, and I'll let you guys kind of have the last words of anything you want to say. This is not over. This goes back to what I said earlier in the podcast. This this is Flash Gordon, and it's the end? Question mark. Because I think going now the way our country is and the way things are going, I think Hollywood is really starting to heat up, and we're going to see more and more. And we could probably revisit this podcast in the next few years and have probably another few more podcasts to talk about the subjects that we've been talking about. So I'll leave the last words with you guys. Anything else you guys want to say?
Yeah, I just think that in this mission, this realm of truth, that we've got belief and we've got skepticism, and there's a war. It's a relentless war that's being waged between the two of them. And I find that the only victory will belong to those who dare to defend their convictions.
It's an idea war. It just hit me. It's like you said, it's an idea, and they're forming their ideas, and we're forming our ideas. Lindsay?
Yeah, I'm not sure what else I would add or sum up. I guess maybe and you can't, we talked a lot about music and movies and art, and that's not just something over here, so to speak. That touches every area of your life, and
yes,
touches the spiritual, and it's something we need to keep in mind. And Laurel Canyon's kind of a microcosm of that, if you will.
Yes.
And
yeah,
something to remind us as believers that what goes into our ears and eyes is important.
yeah. Well, and to it, I'm going to drop this bomb, and then we're going to cut off. But we need to get into the whole thing that we've all discussed before about the different occult revivals and the place. I think we talked a little bit about it in the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll just leave it there, you guys out there in Listen Land, to be continued.
Yep.
Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.